All right. Today we're going to be talking about mainly Guardian, the rise. Well, I keep saying the rise of the Guardians. I've had this idea for a while, and I might make it a shorter video. Yeah, we'll see. This idea around media, usually media that is on television or, mainly consumed by us in everyday life. What part of that is, wouldn't necessarily say 100% that it's true. It's more a statement on whether or not something is vital for you to be aware of and what it might potentially mean. And Rise of the Guardians is one of those movies where there's good information in it, but not necessarily the 100%. Like, it's not always 100% certain, like, where it's going to go with its message, but there's parts of it that I really enjoy because anyone who's a fan of, like, spiritual movement or any awareness of, like, the teachers who've existed throughout all different times, Socrates, Plato, the idea of, like, Ra, Hermes, these gods even that made people be able to see, like this right here. Like, something about it allows them to see the world in a way that's totally different. And that relationship doesn't necessarily change. Like, it's one of the more interesting parts of lore around human culture. Like, human culture for a long time has always had this battle between light and dark. That is always a battle that isn't always necessarily seen. It's a battle that plays out and continues to be one that's made of contention. Like, there's always, the good and bad, the person who's always seeking to be seen or to be recognized as, cut from a different cloth, but, like, somehow more miserable than anybody else who's ever been miserable in the history of misery. And that's the introduction of Pitch as the villain. Pitch is darkness, but also, like, shadow and fear. Like, the entire idea of the insecurity of, I want to say adolescence, but, like, roughly the kids are, like, between the ages of, like, 6 to 9 or 10, where they're still quite young but haven't quite grown to fear the world yet. And that's Pitch's job. Pitch's job is to create that instability, create that fear, and create that darkness. There's, like, a portion of this that is actually something that I've learned to get more acquainted with, and it's this idea that all human beings possess, not only on the outside, as you can see my shadow, like, right there, but within. Like, we have this internal dialogue that is constantly, feeding us with the worst case scenarios, or in some cases, like, how terrible we are for doing something, or, how unfair the world is, or all of these all of these whispers and all of these assumptions about like what it is that's running life, the invisible hands, the nature of magic, and the nature of a lot of things that coexist or don't coexist anymore, or will never coexist, because they exist in two different kind of natures, basically. But all of our nature elaborates for that. Like, it lets it in. Like, there's one series that I really enjoy called Seven Deadly Sins. By the end of the actual manga for it, which is 7 knights who were convicted of terrible crimes. Just to name one is like destroying the Fairy King's forest and burning it to the ground, despite it actually not being that person's doing. Instead, it was a demon or this giant red beast that showed up out of nowhere and just started destroying the entire forest, lighting it on fire. And yeah, getting blamed for like stealing the elixir of, or the fountain of youth or whatever, but it was more or less given to him to keep him alive so that he could actually fight and destroy the demon before the entire forest was destroyed, and so that he can create a new one. And it is that idea that we all have like this innateness that kind of comes out in us. Like right here, I'll go back a little bit, but the relationship of like what he's telling him in this scene is just that there's a core to what makes a guardian a guardian. Like, there's something about them that really sticks out, that the moon really sees is important for them to bring out into the world, and you have to bring it out in yourself. So that's why the Russian nesting doll. I've seen Russian nesting doll, and I've also had like my own theory around it that kind of unraveled me for a little while. That's a path for another day. But yeah, this idea is like, on the outside he seems very stern, but he's kind. He's also mischievous. He can be very aggressive, passionate, but he can also be warm, caring, soft, vulnerable, and then all the way down to the most vulnerable of all, being a baby. Giant blue eyes, always the eyes to see, which is what he's talking about. And then he, shows off all of his toys. He's like, it's because I have these eyes that I see what can be created. I see what's there that can really expand the world. And there's this idea I've realized that is always like, the two can't coexist. Like, I'll just go ahead and say it now. If you haven't seen the movie, you should see it. It's interesting. And definitely, if you see it and you put your own like awareness to it, you might be able to pick up quite a few things. Because every time I've attempted to talk about this movie, I'm gonna put it away. It has caused me a lot of problems. Yeah, anytime I've gone through and done this, like I've let it be there for a while, but now I really don't need to. There's this consistent theme of like there being a relationship between light and dark that had always bugged me for a while, because there is always like, yes, one can't exist without the other. Like, you can see that outside. Anytime there's sun outside, you're going to see a shadow getting cast and all of that. And it's like, but is the entire world just a giant shadow? No, it's not. Is the entire Earth illuminated and has lots of insight based on that illumination? Yeah, you can see a lot. You can see absolutely everything when the sun is out and everything. So that idea, that consistency, and that vibrancy to it was always something that like just drew me to recognize that there's always like hidden messages sort of in media and in movies and stuff like that that is always talking about how you basically get to become like superhuman in some way, shape, or form. And there's another movie that I'll cover later, that's a Netflix movie that I really love. There's quite a few movies that I would just love to share the insights on, because the insights are everything. Like there's a part of it where it's like, yes, listening to a person talk about it in videos and ramble on and on about it, like that's a very special that's a very special moment to have. But to really enjoy going into movies and like seeing them as like this profound thing, where it's always a message getting passed across, and you're always in a communication with the actual person who creates the movies. It's that recognition too, because like they're well aware of what they're doing, at least on some level, not always. Because when it comes to creation, it's sort of like a gamble of whether or not you just go straight for what it is that you're getting when it comes to like creativity and imagination, or if you like cut down on it, or like make, I would say, executive decisions, but they're not really executive, make decisive cuts to what it is that you're actually coming up with, and dealing damage to the full vision of what it is that you want to create. Because I can tell you that it's really hard, because the thing about real life and about light versus dark is that, yeah, we all have exactly that, a shadow, but it's within as well. It's always like the heavier judgments, or like this idea that like if you're really going for something and you feel the passion go away, or you feel like really terrible, like what are those conveying? Because it's all messengers. Like the entirety of the idea of the enemy in Rise of the Guardian is that he wants to be seen. Like he doesn't want to be walked through anymore. He doesn't want to be just a ghost or a phantom that people will never see or recognize. So, create fear, generate terror, go after them, hurt them, make them scared, because then they'll believe in you, because then you become the boogeyman. And that's sort of the idea. There's always like this crusading force that's always like, the world isn't the way that it should be, so I'm going to force the world to become the way that I need it to be, based on my own needs to survive. It's always about survival, or it's always about recognition, or it's always about something that they don't have. And of course it's always the hero who, in I wouldn't say most cases, but in a good deal of cases when it deals with stuff that really goes deep, and sometimes misses the mark, is always it's supernatural. Like what it really is that they're going for is deep in them. Like they find their core. Like as you saw with Santa Claus, him being a baby and always having that innocence to see things through. That is his gift to the world, and that is how he creates his toys. And for Jack, it's playing on purpose. Like it's purposeful play, which has always been one of those things that has always come up for me. It was like, be playful, like, because life is about play. It's not about all that seriousness for me. Because genuinely, when I'm really high in what I'm doing and really a part of and connected to what I'm doing, I'm playing. Like I'm playing with this even, like creating this video in this format and everything. Like I would love for it to get received really well and see people really enjoying it or really being drawn to it, because the truth and wisdom is one of those things that really needs to be served in service when given, because there's so many times in which good information, like I would say like Rise of the Guardians, they have good information in there, but it's not always 100% solid. It's not always wise. It's half wise. Which, if you don't know that term, it's this idea of those what is it? Those who are half wise will be dashed against the rocks by reason of their own folly. So there's always this investment into reason. Reasoning skills around our own thoughts and feelings has been kind of our biggest weak point as a species, because we'll reason out something that is totally ridiculous if you ever have somebody outside of you reflect what it is that they get out of what you're saying. Especially if it's like, I was going for something and then X, Y, and Z happened, so now I can't have Z. What am I going to do about that? And for the other person, they're going to be like, okay, so like I see the reasoning, I see the bad logic behind why it is you didn't go for that. And it could be something as simple as like, I got in the car, I wanted to have like this beautiful conversation with my friend, but then there was like road rage and all of this other stuff that was going on, and them getting a message in the middle of driving that like really sent the entire mood for the rest of the drive. And it's like, yeah, but none of that really had anything to do with what you were going for. It was just a whole bunch of things outside of what you wanted to go for, so you stopped going. Like, there was a reason to stop, so you did. And you allowed that reason to hold you. You allowed that logic to bind you, to keep you from really pursuing it. And I covered it before, and now I'm definitely getting like the push to go into it, is like this idea of privilege. We live a life where the only privilege we really have is being ourselves. And I don't mean that as in like where you were born, how you were raised, none of that stuff. I mean, the privilege is you being in existence as the being that you are. And I mean it more in the sense of there's more to you than most, if ever, anyone ever will realize or give to you in reflection, honestly, truthfully, like in service to you as the viewer. That they won't reflect like the fact that you're great, or the fact that you came here to create lots of beautiful things, lots of powerful things. And yeah, just like this, it's like nobody's going to create this. Nobody has this idea on YouTube where they're like, I'm going to compare spiritual stuff to movies and televisions, like mainly aimed at kids. And it's like, but why not? Like, why isn't that a bigger thing, or like a niche that gets covered and like thousands of channels want to cover it? It's like, if it's out there, I haven't seen it, but that doesn't matter, because that's out there, that's out on the internet. I want to do this for me, because I would love to get all of my insights out there, and I mainly get them from just like watching things and then like ruminating on them just very briefly, because I'm not one to like hold myself to something for very long. I just really enjoy things and then just move on. But when it comes to things that are true, or things that like touch on wisdom rather than half wisdom, where you really hurt yourself, is in there. It's mainly in what we ingest when it comes to entertainment. And so many movies and television show the half-wise of a situation rather than full wisdom, because they'll be like, oh yeah, clarity, but only so much before you kind of like are are just kind of drowning in all of the information that you got without any sort of boat to call your own. And this is definitely not this is definitely not the time nor the place to indoctrinate those who want to go into magic and actually see the world in a benign way, because I don't see the world as like a place that is inherently bad, because there's no real reason to even consider that, or a place that's inherently good, because there's no reason to see that either, really. Because we have so many reasons to see light versus dark, and this movie in and of itself, it shows and encapsulates a lot of that mentality. Is like, but it also, yeah, like it also shows like the higher against the lower, because you see him, at least I showed it, you see him transform dreams, the Sandman's sand, into a nightmare. Pun intended, because, horse. But that's it. Like, that's the relationship that's there. There's so much of that, like, that relationship, that dynamic that is in the movie, and a part of that going forward, is like, you utilize the higher versus the lower, and Sandman, like, really puts the hurt on him later on in the movie, like, to really get him back for jacking his sand and transforming it into nightmares. Like, there's an interesting thing about, like, kids is, like, they mainly, like, around those ages, they experience really terrible nightmares, and that's when the world transforms into a world of fear versus a world of creativity and light, which does happen in the movie, which is why it's half wise, because we get this idea that, like, the forces outside of us are going to fix our problems, when they're not. All the things that we see, all the things that we're a part of, can easily just be a nightmare and stay that way for a very long time, until we come to a space in ourselves where we're mature enough to just not run away from pain or fear or agony of any kind, and just be like, okay, like, I can sit with this. It sucks, but it's manageable, and it's not terrible. And that's the idea. Like, you don't want to have an entire relationship with pain or fear where it's like, I'm going to run away from it, or I'm going to hide, or I'm going to fight it all the time, because you're going to wear yourself down, you're going to destroy yourself. And again, it's half wise, because the idea that, I wouldn't say you're imaginary friends in a way that's derogatory towards imaginary friends, because I have sprites and spirits that I see all the time, and I own that. And that's for me. For me, I own that. And that is an entire world on its own, and it's not a world that you just pack your bags and step into, and that's it. You're done. You no longer feel fear or deal with anger or setbacks or anything. It does not mean that. It means that there's a part of you that you're beginning to tap back into, and it can help you continue to pursue the things that you really love, and really be a part of that, and be a part of that world. It's not a world that's just going to instantly just, like, take you out of everything else. It can happen that way. There's plenty of people who have had near-death experiences and kind of just had that split away from everything else that they dealt with beforehand. And even me, having an invisible heart attack that couldn't be detected by doctors or specialists or anything. And that's a form of your own light and shadow, because it's always shadow. It's not real darkness. If you really take a look at how darkness is darkness, you'll always know that it's just shadows. It's always just shadows. And that's what we're afraid of. Growing up and everything else, it's literally just shadows. Like, I would love to show more of the movie in order to show that, and them standing up to it, but, like, it has been quite a journey just to get this part, so perhaps I'll make a part 2 and just talk about like the actual confrontation, because it's actually really good. I really enjoy it. I really enjoy that because it does take an amount of innocence, but it also takes an amount of energy and awareness of the fact that you're scared and you're going to be scared, but you're not necessarily 100% alone because of the idea of, I would say, imaginary friends, but again, it's not derogatory. It's better to have imaginary friends that actually support your vision rather than those that are actively tearing you down physically in your physical existence, destroying your desire to continue to be creative and to be out there in the world, because that happens too. Yeah, this is just a taste of like the idea and the prompt for this is that, yeah, I always wanted to talk about it because there was always this kind of like inkling to like, yeah, like, but nobody talks about it. Like, this is interesting, but nobody talks about it. So, talking about it, talking about how we have so much information out there to us that's available to us, but like, we're not always necessarily getting like the best impression of what that is. It's much like having, again, this isn't like to bash on anyone. This is like having a preacher who's actually scared of his own shadow, who denies himself pleasure, pain, expression of joy of any kind, expression of sorrow of any kind, especially if he's feeling it in front of his flock or in front of the people that he talks to, and just tries to live this life like he's on something, like he's constantly up there, righteous and all of this other stuff, and everybody else like follows that same example in his flock. Like, they're constantly doing things and being a certain kind of way that kind of deteriorates their own validity as a person moving forward outside of the flock. And that's why I want to touch on this stuff, because like, the world is vast, but there are so many wonderful parts of entertainment as well that like really touch on this stuff and do such a great fucking job. YouTube, gotta be careful with the cussing. But there are so many different entertainments that have come out and have shown their own interest in like getting information, but utilizing it in a way that's creative, for one, is deeply impactful, for two, and for three, its final one is like, it's true. Like, they try to get as close to, and if not just like fully embody what's true, which is great, because that actually helps you, because it can be unpacked, it can be taken apart, it could be written down for later as just like a piece, like a small piece of something, like an offering from another person, because it is a gift. Like, people who write movies and write shows, there's a reason why they got that far. There's a reason why they're there. It's that they sat with a lot. They sat with a lot of setbacks, and like, if anybody's ever heard what it's like behind a movie set or a TV show set, you would have questions about how any movie or any TV show ever gets done. Especially with the ones that are really chaotic. Like, there is an art to creating things, and I just want to illuminate that. I want to have like an actual space to appreciate that on my channel, because like, I'm going to be creating lots of things. I don't know if it's all going to end up on YouTube or anything, but it's definitely going to be out there in the world, and being able to share at least this much, and like to fully come to a completion about this is very important to me. Like, to have that ability to just let this land and see where it goes from there. So I'll catch you all later.
Mm.